Have you ever come across someone like this? Sitting alone in a cafe, no phone, no scrolling, just quietly observing the world, as if dwelling in a different dimension. Perhaps it's that colleague who always turns down group lunches, or the friend who occasionally cancels plans, simply to be alone. We often assume anyone who chooses solitude must be sad, lonely, or hiding from something. But what if the truth is the exact opposite? What if that choice isn't a sign of weakness, but the clearest expression of inner strength? 1. Stillness, the invisible weapon of the strong. In this age, we live amid an unceasing current of information. Every day, millions of data points flood our lives, from social media, news, emails, ads, comments, and endless conversations. The modern individual is surrounded by noise, not just physical noise, but mental noise, expectations, judgments, comparisons, and imposed standards. In such a world, silence is no longer natural. It becomes strange, often misunderstood, even mistrusted. Society now sees silence as a sign of insecurity or a symptom of poor communication. One who doesn't share personal updates online may be seen as distant or odd. One who avoids workplace chatter may be labeled antisocial. One who doesn't respond instantly to criticism may be judged as weak. In a culture that glorifies speed, instant reaction, and constant presence, silence becomes suspicious. Yet from a Stoic perspective, silence is neither passive nor powerless. It is deliberate, chosen by one who knows themselves and what should and should not be spoken. Stoics understand that speech is a form of action, and every action bears consequence. Silence, then, is not a lack, but a form of inner discipline, a refusal to speak merely to fill space, a refusal to react simply because one is provoked. In the writings of Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic thinker, he often reminded himself, if it's not necessary to say, don't say it. Not because he lacked the right to speak, but because he knew words have power to shape thought, to influence others. Words, like arrows, must be precise, necessary, and well-timed. Silence is also a natural defense against emotional manipulation. When insulted, provoked, or misunderstood, our instinct is to speak in defense of the ego. But the Stoic is not guided by emotion. They observe their own reaction, examine their motive, and speak only when needed. In today's world, where every word can be quoted, twisted, and amplified, silence becomes a rational shield. Another truth: silence carries psychological weight. In conversation, people fear pauses and rush to fill the void, often speaking without thought. But the Stoic sees the pause between feeling and response as sacred ground, where reason may enter. They use silence as a buffer, a space where emotions can be recognized and understood, not suppressed, not unleashed. In silence lies an elegant act, the choice not to react, a choice simple in appearance, yet profoundly difficult. Silence is also a refuge for deep thought. When not dragged into shallow exchanges, the mind can return inward, where the real questions await. Am I living by my values or drifting with the world? What truly matters right now? Is this emotion clouding my judgment? Such questions do not arise in noise. They are born of stillness. For the Stoic, silence is a form of inner sovereignty. When they choose not to respond to judgment, not to comment on the trivial, not to argue the meaningless, They are not withdrawing. They are exercising control. They are saying, no person, no event dictates my voice or my emotions. In the workplace, too, silence becomes a strength. The quiet observe more. They catch what others miss. They don't waste energy on petty conflict or the urge to impress. Their calm presence can be unsettling, not because they raise their voice, but because they are unmoved. This groundedness earns trust. Finally, silence is a declaration of freedom from societal expectation. When one dares not to speak, not to be heard, not to seek acknowledgement, they free themselves from the pressure to show up everywhere all the time. They don't chase attention. They need no audience. And that allows them to preserve their energy for what truly matters. In a world where everyone strives to speak more, post more, and react faster, silence becomes an act of resistance, a form of non-doing that is entirely intentional. Not everyone can manage it, but to those who understand the strength of inner fortitude, silence is not deprivation. It is fullness, full of self-control, awareness, and reason. In the rhythm of modern life, the human mind is constantly stretched thin by divided attention. Each day, we absorb a torrent of information, images, messages, and responses. From work emails to social media, from family pressures to societal expectations, everything lays claim to a portion of our mind. In this state, the mind grows disoriented, directionless, and struggles to discern what truly matters. In Stoic thought, this is precisely when stillness is needed, not merely external silence, but inner quiet, where the self can withdraw from social noise and restore clarity of reason. According to Stoic philosophers like Epictetus and Seneca, peace does not come from controlling external events, but from mastering our internal response. To achieve that, the mind must have space to think clearly, undisturbed by fleeting emotions or the echoes of external influence. Stillness is where reason reclaims its rightful place, no longer dominated by panic, regret, or anxiety. It is a state the Stoic actively seeks, not to escape life, but to engage with it more wisely. Stillness also acts as a mental filter. In that space, one can observe thoughts with objectivity, instead of being swept away by emotion. When the mind is calm, negative thoughts begin to settle, like silt in a quiet lake, and what is essential, what is true starts to become visible. It is in stillness that self-inquiry awakens. One of the Stoics' most practiced methods is daily journaling, not to recount events, but to converse with oneself. Questions like, how did I respond to anger? Is this task truly necessary? Am I living by my values? Are asked in solitude. Only when distractions fall away can one recognize internal conflicts and begin the work of reconstructing thought. The sharpening of reason also takes place in stillness. The mind cannot make wise decisions if constantly interrupted. Focus, the core of reason, can only be cultivated when distractions are deliberately cut off. Marcus Aurelius, burdened with the responsibilities of an emperor, still found time to write Meditations, a form of reflective dialogue with himself, marked by radical honesty. It was never meant for publication. It is living proof that reason requires solitude to be refined. Stillness also enables the discernment between one's own thoughts and those imposed by society. Many are driven by invisible fears, fear of falling short, of being left behind, of being judged. In silence, These fears can be examined, dissected, and put in their rightful place. Not every fear deserves a response. Not every expectation must be met. Only when the mind is quiet can one clearly see what truly belongs to them and what is merely a societal shell acquired over time. What is striking is that stillness demands no perfect condition. It doesn't require a monastery or a remote retreat. The stillness Stoicism emphasizes is an inner state, one that can be maintained even amid a crowd, so long as one knows how to return to themselves. The ability to create a sanctuary within the mind is a strength that, like a muscle, must be trained. Through meditation, writing, solitary walks, or simply pausing before reacting. In Stoic philosophy, stillness is a means, not an end. The goal is self-mastery, to live in accordance with reason, to act not from impulse but from principle. But the path to that clarity, to discern what must be done and what must be left undone, only opens when the mind is cleansed, settled, and reordered in stillness. Thus, stillness is not a retreat from life, but a precondition for living deeply. It is the backward pull before the arrow is released, the still moment before a decisive step. In stillness, we do not abandon the world. We prepare to re-enter it with a clear mind, a sharpened reason, and a resolve that does not waver. 2. Solitude is not escape, but return. In common perception today, a person who deliberately chooses to be alone is often assumed to be suffering from depression, trauma, psychological disorder, or social dysfunction. Yet this reflects a narrow view, one that mistakes solitude for avoidance, rather than recognizing it as a vital inner practice through which we come to know our safer selves. In Stoic philosophy, solitude is not only free of negative connotation, it is essential in the pursuit of self-mastery and deeper understanding. To the Stoic, the path of self-cultivation cannot be fully traversed through social relationships, whether in education, the workplace, or even family. The reason is simple. The external world, however valuable, is subject to fluctuation and external influence. Only in the stillness of solitude can one pause long enough to observe oneself with honesty and without distraction. Being alone, therefore, is the minimum condition needed to create the internal space for such observation. Solitude, in the Stoic view, not a rejection of others. It is a deliberate step back, allowing one to shed the layers of social roles, identities, and expectations we unconsciously carry. In daily life, we play many roles: employee, friend, parent, partner. While not inherently harmful, these roles often obscure a deeper question. Who am I without any of them? That question cannot be answered through casual conversation or superficial interaction. It arises only in privacy, without an audience, without judgment, and without the compulsion to impress. One clear example is Emperor Marcus Aurelius, ruler of a vast empire, holding supreme authority, yet still choosing to write meditations in solitude. Those writings were not intended for publication, nor to instruct others. They were silent dialogues with himself, moments of reflection on conduct, emotion, values, and purpose. Though he lived among grandeur, he understood that the only space for true self-connection is where no one is present but the self. Solitude seen this way is not an empty void, but a mental sanctuary, a place where social conditioning is stripped away, revealing the deeper self. Here, there is no space for performance or pretense. Every thought and emotion is laid bare, unfiltered. In this clarity, one begins to distinguish what they truly believe from what they've been led to believe. This is the first step toward cultivating strong reason, one of the cornerstones of Stoic philosophy. Solitude also serves as a filter for relationships. As one gains self-clarity, they begin to view connections around them more clearly. Choices in friends or partners are no longer based on emotion or validation, but on whether those relationships contribute to inner growth. Like a blacksmith keeping only the sharpest tools, one who has endured solitude knows whom to keep and whom to release, not from selfishness, but from an understanding of what nourishes and what drains the soul. Moreover, solitude strengthens one's ability to re-enter society with greater resolve. After reconnecting with the self, one is no longer swayed by the crowd or by impulse. They act not to please others, but in accordance with principle. From that CC4VC, they bring presence into relationships, not to fill a void, but to share from a mind already whole. In summary, in Stoic philosophy, purposeful solitude is neither forced nor evasive. It is a necessary condition for connecting with the deepest and most honest part of the self. And only in that connection can one live with clarity, integrity, and steadfastness, even in the noise and complexity of the world. In modern society, withdrawal, especially when one intentionally steps away from the crowd, reduces social interaction, or chooses to slow down, is often labeled with negative terms: failure, confusion, inability to adapt, or even collapse. However, viewed through the Stoic lens, such retreat is a strategic act, an expression of self-command and inner development. The Stoic does not equate constant presence in the crowd with personal worth. On the contrary, they emphasize knowing when to step back, to restore awareness, re-establish reason, and renew ethical direction. This does not imply complete isolation or rejection of society, but a conscious choice to withdraw from unnecessary stimuli in order to restore inner order. In a world where people are caught in a whirlwind of instant reactions, from phone notifications to social expectations, deliberate retreat becomes the way to detach from emotional inertia and instinctive response. In Stoic thought, impulsive reactions are the mark of an undisciplined mind. When provoked, wounded, or placed in a difficult situation, the human tendency is to respond emotionally and without control. But one who trains in Stoic philosophy recognizes this tendency and chooses instead to step back, not to surrender, but to gain a clearer view of the situation and the emotions rising within. They do not rush to respond, nor seek to retaliate, but create a necessary pause so that reason may emerge and guide their actions. Such withdrawal requires inner strength. It is not easy to pause when everything around urges motion. It is not easy to stay silent when everyone else is trying to be seen. But it is precisely this intentional stillness that forges true resilience. For when one no longer relies on external validation, they are compelled to build an internal compass, composed of ideals, principles, and self-restraint. This becomes the foundation for facing adversity without being shaken, for maintaining equanimity even when the world grows chaotic. Stoic practice does not advocate retreat from society, but it does advocate conscious presence. One need not be present everywhere, nor join every conversation. The one who knows when to withdraw preserves mental energy, avoids needless conflict, and protects clarity of thought and emotion. In such a state, they are not pulled into the chain reactions of their environment, but remain firmly on their own path. Modern psychology affirms that voluntarily disengaging from overstimulating environments helps restore natural rhythms, lowers anxiety, and strengthens emotional regulation. Studies show that those who intentionally withdraw to recharge tend to make better decisions and sustain deeper personal relationships. This aligns with the Stoic spirit, where retreat is not avoidance, but a necessary phase in the pursuit of self-mastery. Moreover, retreat allows for a deeper appreciation of the connection. When one is no longer dependent on external validation, they enter relationships with intention and discernment. These bonds no longer serve to fill a void, but arise from the desire to share values, seek understanding, and grow together. Such intentionality makes relationships more meaningful and enduring, unbound by fear or expectation. In summary, withdrawal through the lens of Stoic philosophy is not a sign of weakness or confusion, but a spiritual strategy for regenerating inner strength. In a noisy world where personal worth is often measured by visibility and constant engagement, deliberate retreat is how one reclaims authority over their life. It becomes the ground upon which reason is renewed, emotions stabilized, and future decisions made from a place of calm, not panic or external pressure. 3. Rejecting shallow connections, a conscious act of resistance. In modern society, where technology allows us to connect with thousands through a few taps, the concept of connection has been diluted to the point of losing meaning. The ease of interacting through messages, comments, or shared content has made communication more accessible than ever. Yet this ubiquity has not brought depth. In reality, most connections today are fleeting, superficial, and devoid of genuine attachment. This is a condition that Stoic philosophy long recognized and warned against. In Stoic thinking, the distinction between communication and connection is vital to the management of one's inner life. Communication is the exchange of information, often surface level, formal, or driven by temporary social needs. Connection, on the other hand, implies something deeper: empathy, mutual understanding, and a bond grounded in shared values. The Stoic knows that not every conversation is necessary, and not every relationship contributes to personal growth. From this perspective, choosing not to engage in relationships that offer no spiritual value is not negative or cold. It is clarity in action. The Stoic does not sever all ties with society, but draws firm boundaries between nourishing and distracting relationships. Just as a gardener must prune away unproductive branches, the Stoic takes responsibility for tending the garden of their relationships with discernment. This discernment does not stem from pride or isolation, but from an awareness of the limits of time, energy, and attention. The Stoic does not chase validation through follower counts or praise from the crowd. They do not treat attention as achievement. They understand that time is the most precious resource, and any connection that consumes it without adding true value must be reconsidered. In their view, anything that does not serve tranquility, reason, or virtue is unworthy of preservation. In truth, many relationships today are maintained not for meaning, but out of social obligation, habit, or fear of isolation. Such ties often drain energy, scatter focus, and distract from personal goals. The Stoic does not let emotion override reason in maintaining these links. They are willing to let go, not out of guilt or social expectation, but because they know genuine connection can only exist when both sides nurture shared values. Importantly, rejecting shallow relationships does not make one closed off. On the contrary, by eliminating superficial interactions, one makes room to invest in deeper bonds, those built on trust, attentive listening, and enduring emotional support. It is through this simplification that depth emerges. In a refined environment, the Stoic not only protects their inner peace, but also cultivates moral and intellectual growth. Moreover, distinguishing between communication and connection allows the Stoic to remain unaffected by praise, blame, approval, or rejection. Their sense of worth does not hinge on being accepted. Shallow ties often compel people to adjust their behavior to suit the crowd, leading to a betrayal of principle. The Stoic remains rooted in virtue, even when no one is watching, and connects only with people or circumstances that reinforce that foundation. In summary, in a world saturated with transactional relationships and mechanical communication, rejecting connections that lack meaning becomes a courageous and lucid choice. The Stoic chooses companions as one selects tools for refining the self. Not many, but few and essential. Through this intentional pruning, they preserve space for reason, serenity, and virtue, even while living amid a noisy and tempting world. In a culture where human worth is increasingly measured by visibility, responsiveness, and attention-grabbing, silence and withdrawal appear almost abnormal. Today's world encourages constant expression, participation in every discussion, rapid response, and continuous updates. In this context, silence is no longer mere quiet. It becomes a quiet form of rebellion, especially when seen through the lens of Stoic values. The Stoic does not view constant presence as a moral standard or obligation. They do not join empty conversations just to avoid silence, nor do they seek to be the center of attention unless it serves the pursuit of wisdom and virtue. Therefore, withdrawing from the social current, when done with clarity, is not avoidance, but selection. Keeping what is essential, discarding what disturbs the mind. In Stoic practice, silence is not the absence of speech, but the absence of unnecessary reaction. The Stoic holds that not everything that happens requires a response, and not every situation demands an explanation. They understand that each reaction expends energy, and if left unchecked, that energy will be scattered across trivial matters. Silence, in this context, is a strategy for conserving inner strength, a way to shield the mind from depletion through its arguments or unresolved conflicts. Moreover, withdrawing from social spaces, whether physical or digital, is essential for restoring inner stillness. The mind cannot remain clear when constantly agitated by external stimuli. In Stoic writings, philosophers like Seneca warned of the danger of the crowd, not merely as a physical presence, but as a metaphor for a mind swept up by the majority, losing the ability to distinguish truth from falsehood, right from wrong. Withdrawal, in the Stoic sense, is not escape. It is stepping back to see more clearly, so one may act more justly. It is worth noting, refraining from retaliation, ignoring insults, or resisting the pull of collective emotion does not stem from weakness or fear, but from rational emotional control. For the Stoic, silence in the face of nonsense is the highest form of self-mastery. They do not allow others' words to dictate their emotions, nor do they let external events damage their inner virtue. Over time, this silence becomes a kind of armor, protecting them from being swept away by momentary impulses. In the modern media environment, where every opinion can be exaggerated, twisted, or weaponized, the one who chooses silence does so not because they have nothing to say, but because they understand. Not everything true needs to be spoken, and not everything spoken leads to truth. The Stoic holds their view until it is necessary to speak, and when they do, it is with reason, not emotion, and never for the sake of impression. Withdrawal is also a way to break the addiction to reaction, a habit deeply ingrained in digital culture. When people grow accustomed to reacting to everything, from hostile comments to breaking news, they lose the ability to step back, observe the whole, and judge fairly. The Stoic chooses silence to preserve agency. They do not let circumstance dictate what they speak or act. It is their slowness, clarity, and deliberate response that sets them apart. In sum, within Stoic philosophy, silence and withdrawal are not signs of surrender, but strategies for preserving reason and moral clarity amid a world in flux. While society urges constant expression, constant reaction, constant connection, the act of stopping, not speaking, not joining the crowd, becomes a form of highest freedom. It is in that silence that one finally hears what matters most, not from the outside, but from within. 4. Emotional intelligence and self-discipline, gifts of default. In everyday life, people are constantly placed in a reactive state. A single word can spark anger. A disapproving glance can trigger insecurity. A negative comment on social media can cost someone a sleepless night. Emotions such as anger, envy, shame, and sadness often arise suddenly and forcefully, pushing people to act without reflection. That is when emotion overrides behavior, rather than reason leading the way. In Stoic philosophy, this is precisely what must be trained: the ability to observe emotion instead of being swept away by it. The Stoic does not deny emotion, but sees it as a natural result of perception, and therefore subject to regulation. However, emotional regulation cannot happen if one has not developed the capacity to clearly observe their own emotional states. To do so requires one crucial condition: separation from the sources of disturbance, or in other words, deliberate solitude. In solitude, one is no longer stimulated by the reactions of others. There are no judgmental looks, no dialogue, no immediate feedback from outside. The result is that emotions begin to surface more clearly, no longer masked by social interaction. When someone sits alone in stillness, lingering emotions rise to the surface like air bubbles from a deep lake. They cannot be covered up by the next conversation or distracted away by busy work. It is in this setting that the ability to observe emotions truly begins to form. Observing emotion is not the same as reacting to it. It is the process of pausing to ask, what emotion is appearing? Where does it come from? Is it reasonable? Is it worth acting on? This is the space between stimulus and response, a concept important to both modern psychology and Stoic thought. When one places a layer of analysis between emotion and action, They are no longer a slave to feeling, but a conscious observer of it. Solitude acts as a natural space for contemplation, where no one interrupts the flow of emotion, and one is permitted to be honest with oneself. In that quiet, anger can be seen for what it is, not to be acted upon, but to be understood. Perhaps it stems from an unhealed wound, unmet expectations, or simply accumulated fatigue. When the root is known, the emotion loses its power to dominate. It is no longer my anger, but an emotional reaction occurring within me. That language marks a perceptual distance, a necessary space for reason to intervene. This practice requires persistence and inner discipline. Not everyone can sit alone and observe emotions without judgment. Yet in Stoic philosophy, the training of the mind is paramount, and solitude is the ideal training ground. There, one does not need to perform, is not distracted, and has no need to appear strong. They are allowed to be vulnerable, but not ruled by feeling. They are allowed to grieve, but not to let sorrow eclipse reason. Moreover, training to observe emotions in solitude enhances the ability to handle social situations. Once familiar with recognizing and managing emotion in stillness, one is better equipped to remain calm amid external stressors. Someone who has learned to identify anger in solitude will more likely restrain it when provoked. Someone who has faced their own fear in silence is less likely to panic in real crisis. This is the result of a quiet but enduring practice. In summary, in Stoic thought, solitude is not a negative state to be avoided, but an ideal environment for emotional refinement. It is in solitude that one can clearly see emotions without being drowned out by the world's noise. To observe emotion instead of obeying it is the first step in becoming self-governed, rational, and ethical. And it all begins not with words, but with a moment of silence between oneself and oneself. In Stoic philosophy, self-discipline is not viewed as obedience to external demands, but as the clear expression of an inner order governed by reason. Discipline is not mere adherence to rigid rules, but the harmony of thought, action, and value, held firm regardless of circumstance. To reach such a state, one requires a specific environment, free from distraction, without pressure to perform, without applause, and without judgment. In this context, solitude becomes the ideal ground for cultivating and testing the strength of inner discipline. When alone, one is no longer influenced by the gaze of others, nor driven by praise or fear of disappointment. With no supervision, no reward, no punishment, every action now reflects the true maturity of one's discipline. A person who maintains right habits, even when no one is watching, is not acting for immediate gain, but in alignment with the principles they have chosen to live by. In such conditions, discipline becomes a test of awareness and moral character. It is no longer the result of compliance, but the expression of conscious choice, repeated relentlessly in the smallest of actions. Waking up early, keeping promises to oneself, completing work without reminders. All are signs of an ordered inner life, one that does not depend on external forces to sustain motivation. This is the kind of discipline exalted by Stoic philosophy, one that needs no supervision, no reward, yet upholds right conduct because it is understood to be the only path to a life of integrity. Solitude also allows the individual to clearly identify habits and behaviors imbibed by society. Immersed in a collective environment, one easily acts by social inertia, doing because others do, quitting because others quit, changing to avoid being different. But in solitude, those influences vanish. What remains is the individual and their choice. From here, the Stoic practitioner can clearly distinguish which actions arise from their own reason and principles, and which are unconscious reactions shaped by the surrounding environment. It is also in solitude that one is forced to confront procrastination, laziness, and negative emotions without anyone else to blame. There is no one to make excuses to, no situation to hide behind. Each act, whether of effort or avoidance, is the result of personal choice. It is precisely in such moments that the capacity for self-governance is formed. The Stoic learns to resist the temptation of comfort, to face discouragement, and to maintain commitment to what ought to be done, even when motivation is absent. This is a power cultivated in silence, but its effect is lasting and far-reaching. Unlike reactive discipline, which often only exists under pressure or for short-term goals, the discipline forged in solitude is the most enduring, because it requires no external drive to sustain it. Disciplined action becomes its own reward, for it brings clarity to the mind, peace to the spirit, and steadiness to one's conduct. It is this deep satisfaction that the Stoic continually seeks, not out of a need for recognition, but from the knowledge that they are living in accordance with the rational and moral nature of a human being. In sum, solitude is not merely a space for quiet. It is also the arena in which inner discipline is tested and strengthened. In the state of being alone, where external stimuli fall away, one can most clearly see whether they are living by reason or being led by emotion, acting by principle, or out of habit. For the Stoic, it is in that aloneness that the self is tempered into autonomy, consistency, and resilience, thus laying the foundation for a life that is both grounded and profound. 5. Solitude, a journey inward to reconstruct the outer world. In Stoic philosophy, all attempts to change the outer world are meaningless if one has not first understood the self. The pursuit of stability, harmony, or life direction lacks a firm foundation if it does not begin with a mind that has been examined and ordered. The Stoic does not seek to interfere with the world through impulsive reactions or emotional actions, but turns inward first, questioning the roots of behavior, beliefs, and motivation. That process demands one essential condition: deliberate solitude. Solitude, in the Stoic context, is not a forced state, but a strategic choice, a temporary separation that allows the inner life to be cleansed of external pressure and expectation. Only when no longer governed by the gaze of others can one hear the deeper thoughts often drowned out by busyness, social course, and pattern behavior. It is in that silence that essential questions begin to emerge. What values am I living by? Are the things I pursue truly rooted in my convictions, or merely shaped by influence? Solitude acts as an honest mirror, where one can no longer conceal internal contradictions with words or performance. Every thought, feeling, and decision appears with clarity, no longer colored by the surrounding environment. When removed from the machinery of society, the Stoic practitioner can begin to discern which beliefs were unconsciously adopted, what truly holds meaning, and what truths have long been avoided. Confronting these truths may not be pleasant, but it is necessary to rebuild the structure of thought and life direction. A person who has never questioned themselves is prone to living reactively. They act according to circumstances, shift with trends, and adjust their behavior to meet others' expectations. The absence of clear self-awareness causes major life decisions, from career to relationships to facing adversity, to lack consistency. Under pressure, they grow confused. In failure, they collapse. Even in success, they feel empty. This is the result of building an outer world without having established inner stability. The Stoic understands that the world cannot be controlled, but one's response to it can. And to do that, one must first know who they are, what they believe, and what is non-negotiable within their value system. These questions cannot be answered in casual conversation, nor resolved through social media or common advice. They can only be understood in stillness, where one may engage in uninterrupted dialogue with the self. From that foundation, relationships, work, and life decisions become more intentional. Once they know themselves, a person no longer chases external standards. They feel no need to prove anything to anyone, nor to imitate the lifestyle of the crowd. Instead, they choose relationships based on value alignment, work that fits both their abilities and inner direction. And most importantly, they know how to say no to what would lead them away from the path they've clearly seen within. Self-knowledge does not mean finding final answers to every question. It is a process of constant refinement and renewal of awareness. Each return to solitude is a chance to re-examine direction, test alignment between ideal and action, and reaffirm personal ethics. It is this persistence in self-dialogue over the years that helps one build a deliberate life, where every action has a reason, and every step draws strength from within. In summary, for the Stoic, solitude is not a sign of withdrawal, but a necessary condition for building a firm foundation of awareness. Only when one comes to understand themselves, not through others, but through honest observation in silence, do outward actions gain value, direction, and intention. That is the beginning of a life that is deep, self-possessed, and unshaken by the turbulence of the world. After a phase of inward return for reflection and cognitive renewal, the person does not remain in isolation. The goal of solitude in Stoic thought is not to avoid life, but to prepare a solid base of reason and virtue from which one may re-enter the world, no longer guided by impulse or fleeting emotion. This is the process of re-engagement with the outer world, but now not as a reaction to the crowd, rather as deliberate action rooted in a refined inner life. One who has journeyed through solitude is capable of remaining lucid in a complex society. Having grown familiar with facing their own thoughts and feelings in stillness, they no longer require external validation to feel worthy. They are no longer swayed by praise or blame, do not act to please others, and avoid interactions pursued merely to feel connected. Their presence becomes more intentional, not because they are aloof, but because each appearance carries clear purpose, aligned with the values and direction shaped within. Re-entering the world from a solid foundation allows one to view relationships through a different lens. They no longer seek others to fill a void, but to share a fullness already cultivated within. As a result, relationships become clearer and more meaningful. The Stoic practitioner does not maintain social ties at all costs, nor do they join groups merely to avoid feeling isolated. They choose companions, as they would tools, based on how they support the development of virtue and reason. not convenience or familiarity. The way they communicate also bears a different tone. They feel no need to speak at every moment, to assert opinions in every circumstance, or to win arguments. Through persistence, they can listen without reacting, observe without rushing to judge, and choose silence as a way to preserve inner peace. These behaviors stem not from hesitation or indecision, but from a strength of control forged during time of state. Their intentional reconnection with the world also shows in how they choose what is worth their investment: time, work, goals, people. One who has lived in stillness understands the value of attention and therefore guards it carefully. They decline superficial conversations, reject compromises that violate their principles, and resist the pull of fleeting trends. This refusal is not a closing off, but the expression of a clearly defined value system. In it, every outward action is weighed against the rational foundation built within. The result of this process is stability, not only for themselves, but extended to their environment. In a chaotic world, a person with inner composure becomes a fixed point, where others may sense safety and consistency. They are not easily swayed, nor easily provoked. That calm presence is not innate, but earned through a long journey, where solitude served as a silent gym, without noise, without audience, but full of discipline. Returning to the world is not a hurried step, but a deliberate process, where each action is guided by awareness. The Stoic knows that outward presence only holds meaning when it truthfully reflects the inner world that has been shaped. They do not aim to build an image, but focus on maintaining alignment between word, deed, and value. This is the mark of someone who has walked through silence, faced themselves in stillness, and accepted solitude as part of the path to maturity. In summary, in Stoic philosophy, reconnecting with the world after solitude is not a random return, but an intentional re-entry, carrying with it a mind that has been refined, a value system that has been tested, and a strength no longer dependent on external affirmation. Because of this, they do not merely exist within the world. They become an anchoring presence amid the uncertainty of modern life. I used to think that living alone, choosing silence, or turning away from social interactions was something negative, a sign of isolation or loss of direction. But the more I matured, the more time I spent alone, I realized solitude didn't weaken me. It made me stronger. It was precisely in those moments when no one was around that I began to hear my true inner voice. And what's remarkable is that this voice wasn't loud or urgent, but calm, convincing, and clear. A kind of wisdom that only arises when the mind is truly still. We often live in reaction. Anger leads to confrontation. Sadness seeks distraction. Loneliness drives us to fill the silence with conversation. But when I began practicing Stoicism, I learned to pause and observe instead of reacting instantly. When criticism came, I no longer rushed to respond. When I was overlooked, I no longer felt the need to prove myself. I came to understand that in certain moments, doing nothing is the very act that preserves my peace and reason. I began cutting off relationships that drained me, stepping away from social media for a few days, and using my mornings to write a few lines to myself. These small actions, repeated over time, helped rebuild my inner life, not to retreat from the world, but to return to it with greater steadiness and intention each day. If you feel the need for stillness, don't be too quick to see it as something wrong. It might just be an invitation to return, to understand yourself, to rebuild your inner foundation, and to prepare for a more grounded presence in life. Like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next reflection. And if there's a place in this world that needs your full presence, start by learning to be fully present in your own silence. See you in the next video.